All right. Hey, welcome. It is Saturday. Yeah, I was like, do I feel like streaming today? I really didn't. I took a nap. I was tired, and I was like, there's this one video that somebody sent me a while back that I said, I might want to do a review on it. But I was like, when? When am I going to do this review? So I was like, yeah, I'll do it Saturday night. And then I was like, oh man, I'm so tired. I really wonder why I want to do this review. And then I was like, yeah, you know what? It's not going to take that long. So it's just not going to be a very long stream, but I think it's going to be important to do this review because this is a video that somebody had sent me to get my opinion on, right? And I can tell people, look, if you send me a video and you want my review on it, I'm probably going to, tell you what I think of it, right? I mean, I think it's nice that people send me stuff, right? I mean, I asked them to, and they send me stuff, so I just don't want to like blow it off. And the fact it's short videos. I mean, I tend to do reviews of videos that are less than 20 minutes. 30 on the outside. I can't do a 2-hour video. I mean, come on, that would take 6 hours the way I do, videos. So this is only about 17-minute video. I'll even do it at a little higher speeds, but it basically was a video by a channel, Red Pill Logic. I don't listen to them. I know of them. I know I guess they have something worked out with Mike Winger. If you guys know who he is, he's a Christian apologist. But he did a video on atheist arguments. He did 10 of them that I guess somebody left on one of his videos. And he tried doing it under like 3 minutes a piece, and I don't think that really kind of did some of these arguments justice. I don't like the way the arguments were worded, but I think he was dismissive of them far too much, right off the bat. I don't think he really even tried to steelman the argument. Sure, he got some of the analysis right on far as the fallacies, but just because something is fallacious as far as an informal fallacy doesn't mean that the conclusion doesn't follow. It doesn't mean there's something not there, And I think that we should not just, say to an argument, hey, this is a bad argument because it's a fallacy, but maybe kind of say, sure, this is fallacious, but even if it wasn't, it wouldn't necessarily be the conclusion that you're coming up with or why the conclusion isn't really good argument. I think that we should apply that equally when it comes to atheist arguments as we should to theist arguments, right? Anyways, who do we got there? Lady Firebrand, how are you? April, how are you? Like I said, I do not expect this to be a much watched video. I don't get a lot of views on my reviews any longer, which is fine. I only do them for certain people that really want to dive in and go, hey, how do I tack on our argument, right? Because I see a lot of people that just hand wave an argument away. Those be like, hey, this argument sucks. Okay, why? And then they don't even know the basics of the logic, why it's incorrect, whether it be formal or informal. So let's kind of dive into it because, like I said, I don't want it to be long. And every time I say that, it's long, but hopefully it won't be. But anyways, hopefully you guys can hear this thing outside as soon as I start it. I'm going to show it now. You should see this guy here. And I got to pull up on my side too. Okay. Let me know if the outside can hear it because, like I said, I'm going to go through. It's only 7 minutes. I'm sorry, not 17, 7 minutes. So it's going to be real short. So, all right, let's see here. So you can hear this.
This is going to be a good one. So a few days ago, I'm scrolling through the comment section of this channel, and I came across something that left me speechless.
I hope that music's not copyrighted. It's elevator music, but whatever.
At first, I wasn't sure if this was serious or if it was just a joke. The comment claimed to offer 10 ways to prove that God doesn't exist. This comment also caught the attention of my friend, Mike Winger, who has a teeny tiny YouTube channel called The Bible Thinker.
Now, let me tell you up front. I do know Mike. Mike knows me. And here's the thing. Mike doesn't want to go on any channel where he has to actually, take on any of the harder arguments. Mike had told me straight up that he has a regent board or something like that, or him and one other, the other apologetics told me something very similar. But they just really won't go on any kind of non-believer channel. I find that to be kind of telling. I think that if your position is strong enough where you believe something, you should go on any kind of channel if it's an honest channel to go on to. I got nothing against Mike personally. I think his apologetics are horrible. I don't like his apologetics. I think he's one of the more he uses more rhetoric, empty rhetoric than anything else. But he's a decent guy, I guess. I mean, but I find it very telling that Mike Winger just will not go on any channel that doesn't support him. Fully as a Christian, right? And I just find that to be odd. April says, did you see my square of opposition? I left you as a comment on the video. We talked on it. I did not, actually. I'm glad you pointed that out, April. Did you put it as an imager file or something? I looked at my comments too. I didn't see it. I will do that after this video. I promise. Okay. Because yes, I do want to see, what you came up with. Nobody else did, but I will look. Hey, Pheasant. So, anyways, like I said, that Mike's a decent guy, but I find it very telling that he just will not, come on to like non sequitur show or just talk to anybody who disagrees with him. I just think that's odd. Learn
You
to think
probably haven't
biblically.
heard of it. For fun, I challenged Winger to respond to all 10 challenges in less than 2 minutes. Mike said, under 2 minutes? That's 12 seconds each. I don't know if I can do that. I said, fine, 3 minutes. He replied, challenge accepted. But why should Mike get to have all the fun? So because I'm a good sport, I decided to show Winger how it's done. It's time to make Mike my wingman.
All right, let's see how it's done. I'll just skip this part right here.
While we're doing it. Today's challenge comes courtesy of Brian Doyle.
Okay, Brian
Doyle, he offers
what you
10
got?
ways to prove that God doesn't exist. Let's see what he's got.
Now, before we even start, let me make this very clear. There really isn't such a thing as a proof that God exists or God does not exist. There are arguments that could be both valid and sound. I could give you a valid and sound argument. I give you two of them. And one of them has to be true by necessity. Okay? So I could give you a valid and sound argument for or against God, but the problem is we don't know which one it is. And so when somebody says, here's 10 things that prove, that's right out of the gate. I think something that's not meeting the bar for what a proof is. I know a lot of people just use the term very loosely. I do not. When you say you prove something, you need to prove it using logic. And it doesn't have to be formal logic. You could, you don't have to, be versed in predicate or potential logic or anything like that. You just premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, conclusion, right? And if it's valid, that follows some rule of inference, great. If the premises are true, wonderful. But this atheist guy, I don't remember his name, but it doesn't matter. When he says he has 10 proofs, I think that's misusing the word, so to speak, because you're not proving anything. You're arguing. You can say 10 evidences for, like on my video where I had 10 things, why Christianity is false. I didn't claim any of them was a proof, and by the way, it was classical Christianity, but I didn't say, oh, this proves anything. What I said was these are arguments that can be used to justify a belief that there is no God, right? And that's how I think the atheists should have started off. These 10 things that you can use to justify that God does not exist, okay? Or if you just want non-belief or agnostic. Campbell says, long time. Yeah, it's been a while, man. Medical emergency with my wife. Want to come to my podcast. I'm sorry to hear about your medical emergency. I'm always interested in people's podcasts. It's just a matter of my timing, but absolutely. Yeah. And Christopher's out there too. Hi, Christopher. All right, so let's go.
Video guy, please put through.
Mr. Batman has proven God with logic. Yeah, that's definitely called a non sequitur. That's definitely that still doesn't follow.
3 minutes on the clock. And let's include a fallacy counter, just because. Proof number 1. The fact that a human being has to tell you about the existence of your God proves there's no God. We would be born with knowledge of its existence. The first proof offers the first fallacy. It's called a non sequitur. The conclusion just doesn't follow. Human beings have to tell us about the existence of all kinds of things, but that doesn't prove that those things don't exist. For example, teachers tell terrified students about fractions, but that doesn't prove there's no fractions. Bad start.
All right, so the thing with this is that, okay, sure, you could argue this is a non sequitur. And there's different things by what people mean by non sequitur. There's a formal logical fallacy, which is it doesn't follow from logical rules of inference, and then it's more of a colloquial understanding of non sequitur, which just something doesn't follow. Like, hi, my name's Steve. Vanilla is better than chocolate. That's a non sequitur. It's a grammatical non sequitur, right? I'm not making any kind of logical argument there. Clearly, I'm not having any structure. So yeah, this is a non sequitur in that regard. All right. The argument clearly doesn't prove there's no God, and the atheist is using the word proves, I think, way too much, obviously, because that if this right here was a proof that proves something, it would be an incredible find, right? So people throwing out these terms like prove, don't do it unless you've actually proven something. If you go to my blog, I prove things. I use logic, but it minimizes and trivializes what you have to go through to check to see if a proof is good and valid and sound when you say things like the fact that a human being has to tell you the existence of your God proves there's no God. If you look at the video that I did on the 10 things that reasons why I think classical Christianity is wrong, I didn't say proves there's no God. What I said was something very similar to this, though. What I said was there's no objective fact of the matter that we can determine. There's nothing that I can point to and go, there's God. There's nothing that I can say is a what's called a truth maker that makes the proposition God exists true. That's the difference between how I presented this argument and how Brian Doyle presented this argument. Right? Now, red pill logic is correct that it's a non sequitur, okay, but he doesn't get into why this is a good or bad argument. Just because it's a non sequitur, red pill logic has done what's called the fallacy. He assumes that the argument's bad without even trying to address the actual crux of the argument or steelman it. Because Brian goes, well, we would be born with knowledge of his existence. Well, not necessarily, right? That doesn't follow. Sure, too. But he is right that everything we've ever learned about gods is from people. Think about this. Everything you know about God and religion and what you believed and the people that used to be theists, you were told to by someone, whether it be oral or verbal or written. You read it somewhere. Even the diehard theist that just reads the Bible gets it from the Bible. You've always been told. God has never told you anything. There's people that claimed it, but I certainly believe that's BS. But you're out there listening to this. Can you say that anything you've learned was not from a person? So if you have a omnipotent, all-powerful being, I think that the way that he goes about communicating with things, the people, that is very poor. Right? If he wants to make his presence known and he wants to have his rules followed, he needs to do it in a much more direct way. Even says, aren't all logical fallacies non sequitur? No, only formal logical fallacies are non sequiturs. A formal logical non sequitur, all of them are non sequiturs, right? Anything that is a formal logical fallacy that has some kind of fallacious inference is a non sequitur. But there are informal logical fallacies, right? And those are not non sequiturs. Right? A red herring is not a non sequitur, but all formal logical fallacies are non sequiturs. If that's what you mean, even I think so. All right. So anyway, so like I said, this is why you can't spend 3 minutes on an argument, right? I mean, it just creates a little bit more because red pill logic didn't address what Brian was really trying to say. The fact is that everything that you know about your belief in God, red pill logic, somebody has told you. Now, it doesn't prove anything, but it still goes back to my 10 things why I think classical Christianity is false, is that there's just no objective truth maker there that we know about. There's nothing there to say there's a there, as they say. And I realize that's weak evidence, right? I'm not saying that any of my arguments were strong evidences against God, but the thing is that these are all evidences that build up cumulative. It's a holistic thing. And it certainly is not, for me, sufficient to deny all gods. I mean, there's just certain things as an agnostic I cannot get to say there's just no, creator being that created everything. It's in a philosophical sense, it's very difficult for me to get there. However, there's certain things about classical theism I just think are just absurd. Obviously, like the flood never happened. Noah's Ark never happened. Adam and Eve was a mythos. It was basically a creation story from the Hebrews. If you read the Gnostic literature, they have their own creation stories. And so, yeah, I don't think that the Christian version, at least what you find from mainstream Christianity about this God, that if you don't believe in him, you're going to be going to hell. I don't believe that. I don't think a benevolent being would do that. Now, that doesn't mean there's still not some aspect of Christianity that could be true. Okay, but there's just the hardcore fundamental Baptist type. They're wrong. I think they're 100% incorrect on the Baptist stuff. I think that any kind of fundamentalist religion, any kind of believe me or you're going to hell religion, I'm just at this point, I just think it's all false because they're arguing ad baculum at that point, right? They're just saying, hey, you know what? You need to believe me or else you're going to hell. And they'll just say, well, I'm just trying to warn you of the outcome. Well, if your God has to warn me of the outcome with 1,000 other people saying the exact same thing and you don't know which one to pick, that's confusing. That's not a just God to say, hey, you know what? Hey, look, you had in your lifetime, you had 6,000 people tell you that if you didn't believe them, they're going to hell. That one person, though, he was right. You messed up. That doesn't make any sense, So, yeah, a lot of the religions that use the old "believe me or going to hell" thing, I can't accept. I think probably most of them are false, and the rest I'll reserve judgment on. But of course, I don't believe any of them because I'm not a theist. But anyways, as you can see, though, the way this was worded, and this is why this is not going to take only 3 minutes to do each thing. But you can see where this is worded. Brian Doyle was trying to get somewhere, but it was poorly worded. So was it a non sequitur? Sure, but that doesn't mean that the argument he was making wasn't a good argument, okay? Or at least something that should not have been just addressed in 3 minutes, right?
Proof number 2. A God belief is simple geography. Being raised in a Christian home decides which God you believe in. This is a textbook example of the genetic fallacy. You cannot invalidate a belief by showing how someone came to hold that belief. So this proof is about God belief, not about whether or not God exists. Put another fallacy on the board.
See, I disagree with him. I don't think it is a genetic fallacy. Let me explain why. And, again, people will say pro and con whether it is or isn't. You might have people say it is, might say it isn't. I don't think it's a genetic fallacy, only for the fact that genetic fallacy is saying you're wrong because of the source that you had it from. And again, it's usually from, like, oh, you heard this from your dad, therefore it's wrong, right? Now, I could argue, hey, you got this from Answers in Genesis. It might probably be wrong. I can't say it is wrong because it's from Answers in Genesis, because that would be a genetic fallacy, right? If you say something's false merely because of the source, that's a genetic fallacy. But if we know certain citations come from sources that are poorly referenced and poorly, sourced, then there's nothing wrong to say, oh, you've heard that on Fox News? Yeah, there's a high probability it may not be right. I think that's fine, right? And by the way, I used to watch Fox News, so whatever. I mean, about one time I enjoyed their content. But of course, in the last, 10 years or something. But I mean, even still, Answers in Genesis, they do have things that are right. There's stuff on Answers in Genesis and ICR that are not completely wrong, right? One of my arguments is on creation.com. Doesn't mean it's wrong just because it's on creations.com. Matter of fact, they promote my argument. They think my argument's right. So a genetic fallacy is when you say you're wrong because of the source. I don't think this is what this guy's saying here, that's Brian's saying. What he's saying is that your religion, what you were taught to believe growing up, is heavily influenced by your upbringing. That is absolutely true, by your geological location. My friends were predominantly Mormon. I became Mormon, people that are predominantly in Catholic environments are going to probably become Catholic. People that are going to be in Hindu environments probably going to become Hindu. It's just what you're brought up with. I think that's absolutely true. I think that your upbringing is going to influence your beliefs. I mean, if your two parents are both Christians, their kids are probably going to be some form of Christian. Now, maybe later on they might rebel, right? But how many times you find two people that are staunch Roman Catholics and the child becomes Jewish? It's very rare, probably, right? So I think that Red Pill Logic dismissed this argument far too quickly because he wasn't addressing the argument. There's, again, the fallacy. He just, said, oh, this is a fallacy, a genetic fallacy, which, again, it's not, because the person is not arguing that the belief is wrong because it's from some poor citation. He's arguing that because people live in certain geographical locations where you have a predominant area of a certain belief, that you're more likely to have that belief. Now, does that make the conclusion that belief is false? No, right? Because, again, you cannot just jump to that extent. But you can certainly argue that because so many people live in so many geographical locations, they all can't be correct, that you're going to have a lot of false belief. So I don't think it's a genetic fallacy. Okay? And by the way, please let me know what you think as we go. If you guys agree, disagree, so like on number 1, just type agree, disagree. And if you disagree, that's fine. Let me ask why. But as we're going through this in the live chat, can you guys tell me if you agree with my analysis? Not with the argument, but with my analysis, right? So my analysis of 1, do you agree with it? Disagree. Analysis of 2, do you agree with it or disagree? I like the feedback.
So much for proof number 2.
Oh, his Campbell says we were raised Episcopalian. My dad and brother converted to Judaism. Weird. Yeah, look, it not like it can't happen, right? But it is kind of rare, I'd imagine.
Proof number 3. There was no time before the Big Bang, so that means that there was no time for a God to exist in or create things in. This challenge mistakenly assumes that God is necessarily a temporal being, that he must exist and act in time. But Christians have traditionally held that God is a timeless being outside of time prior to creation. So there's no proof here, just a straw man fallacy.
Well, yes and no. That's not a straw. I don't think there's a straw man fallacy because they're not straw manning the argument, because the argument is that God being timeless still doesn't mean there isn't a point in time. This goes between what's called A theory of time and B theory of time, and also goes between what Dr. Alex Malpass and Dr. William Lane Craig were talking about when it comes to countable infinities. The difference between what's called a simple future case, I will count, and what's called a future perfect case, I will have counted. And there's a difference in how you approach something along the lines of I will have counted infinity after a certain period of time, infinity, rather than I will count from like all the natural numbers if I count for infinity, right? So there's a difference in the tenses also between present, past, and future in a tenseless model of time, which would be B theory of time, as opposed to a tense theory of time. If I talk about something where time is still exists in the future or in the past and exists in the future as some kind of complete entities, future, past, present, that's B theory of time. And so even if God is a timeless creature, even as some kind of infinite being, the argument still stands. There has to be some point in time relative to us where he said, I want to create the universe. Here's the universe. And there's mankind. Now, again, it might be in the meta time. I asked this question of Dr. Ross, and I said, hey, do you subscribe to A theory of time and B theory of time? And his answer was pretty good, actually. He's like, C, God time. And I'm like, okay, not quite understand what that meant, but I kind of get what he was going for, because the multiverse time is completely different from our time. These are universes that are spatial temporally isolated from us, but they still have their own time with respect to the universes, right? Because time and infinities are complicated. Infinities are complicated. Anybody who's ever done any work in calculus knows infinities are complicated. And so when you start talking about this timeless God that exists in all time, is that something that just like before the Big Bang, after the Big Bang? Because if it's before the Big Bang, it cannot be before the Big Bang with respect to us, because that's a non sequitur. That is I should say non sequitur. It's a meaningless. It's a nonsense statement. The time before Big Bang with relative to us is nonsense, because it's like you can't go north in the North Pole, right? The beginning of time was Big Bang. Big Bang was actually the beginning of space time, right? So you can't say what was there before time, because that doesn't make sense, because time was created at the moment of the Big Bang. But outside of our universe, in some kind of spatial temporal out of the universe, then it has no causality to us. Then you can start talking about time with that. And so if God is some being that has infinite existence throughout all the multiverses, and by the way, yes, I do subscribe to at least level 1 multiverse. I don't know about level 2, 3, and 4, but I mean, one multiverse, yeah, I think that's kind of a given, but whatever. But just because God is timeless, this is not a bad argument. This argument has been talked about multiple times by scholars about what it means to have, God creating in time. And this, again, William Lane Craig loves his A theory of time. Why? Because he likes the Kalam cosmological argument, right? He loves that argument. He loves the Kalam. And yes, atheists, stop saying that the Kalam is invalid. It is not invalid. It is absolutely valid. When you want to deny the premises, that's fine, but make sure you understand what the premises are. I've seen a lot of atheists that do not understand the premises in a modus tollens or modus ponens argument. The two premises on the Kalam, the first one is anything that begins to exist has a cause. That's the premise. Premise 2 is the universe began to exist, and then the conclusion, then it had a cause. So premise 1 is P implies Q. P is not the premise. Q is not the premise. Those are called atomic propositions. But those are part of the premise 1. The premise 1 is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. And I see that happen so many times when people try to evaluate my arguments. They'll argue things like, well, you started with if, therefore your argument's wrong. What? Every argument in a syllogism like that, or in a modus tollens, starts with if. It's if then. It's a conditional implication. If you see somebody tell you that your argument's wrong because you started with if, they know nothing about what the hell they're talking about on basic logic. Clearly, because every one of them starts as if then. P implies Q is an if then statement. It can be written many different ways. P implies Q. If P, then Q. P therefore, or P implies Q. A whole bunch of different ways you can write this. If it's the case that P, then it follows that Q. But that's the premise. And so this really goes into a much more deeper concept of what we mean by timeless when we talk about God. And so I think, again, this is not something that you can just answer in 3 minutes. And it's certainly, I don't think in any way a straw man fallacy, because even if God is timeless, it doesn't negate the argument that how does a timeless being do something in time, right? So, Campbell says, what about a brute fact? Well, I mean, I accept right now just brute facts exist. I think there's really only 3 different ways you can describe the universe. One is an infinite regression, which, by the way, is not logically invalid. A lot of people say, well, it can't be, the universe can't be infinite regression because that's just, illogical. No, it's not. It's hard to conceptualize because our brains are not wired to think in terms of infinity. I mean, if you go look at Cantor's diagonal proof, and you also look at like Hilbert's Hotel, and you look at all these things dealing with infinities, you have to really, try to wrap your mind around even something as simple as like Russell's paradox. Does the set of all things contain itself? You have to really wrap your head around what is being said. Is there ways around these things? Yeah. I mean, by choosing different axioms and rephrasing things in a different way using different axioms, you can resolve a lot of these paradoxes. But that took the brilliancy of a lot of, mathematicians, that knew a lot more about these things than we ever will hope to, right? I mean, Hilbert and Russell and, Zermo Franklin and Frankl, Zemo Frankl, axiom of choice, ZFC. I can't even pronounce what they are. I'm so tired. That axiomatic theory is just amazing. And it takes a lot to really dive into what we're talking about with infinities. So I think that, again, red pill logic didn't really do this one justice. But it is not a straw man fallacy because, sure, even if you accept God is timeless, but what does that mean, though, as far as us? When did all of a sudden a timeless being say, hey, at some point in time, I'm going to stop right here? Like, for example, I'll give you this analogy. The real number line is infinite. It extends from negative infinity, goes to 0, midpoint, and then in positive infinity. And then, by the way, that's not the highest order of infinity. That's only alpha null. That's actually the lowest cardinality, right? I mean, if you think about it, the real numbers is alpha null. That is a cardinality that's lower than the cardinality of higher cardinalities that have a higher degree of infinity. And so, when you're going from negative infinity to infinity, at some point in time, you will have reached 0, right? You go from negative infinity to infinity, you will have reached 0. But will you ever? But the difference is will I get to 0 or will I have counted 0 to 0 once I go from negative infinity to infinity? But if you're just traveling from negative infinity, are you ever going to reach 0? I mean, if you think about it. If you're traveling for an infinite amount of time from negative infinity, you will have reached 0 at some time, right? But you would never reach infinity. And so that's the difference between will have counted it and have counted that Malpass and William McCraig were talking about that I wrote about on my blog. Very difficult to wrap your head around that. It took me 3 days. I ain't going to front. I had to ask Alex, what the hell were you talking about? I mean, I understood kind of, but I'm like, can you break it down to like a 5-year-old kind of thing? And even then, it was very complicated. So again, this is a good argument. The problem is it's not exceptionally well worded, and I don't think I don't think red pill logic really did it justice. But this is not a straw man.
Proof number 4. The Abrahamic God cannot exist because it wasn't the first God to be created. There are other gods that have been proclaimed to exist before this God. They can't all be true, so if we can deny the existence of one of these gods, we can use the same method to deny them all. If this is a good argument against God, then it's also a good argument against science, since older false concepts are often replaced by newer true concepts. On Doyle's logic, since the older geocentric view is false, we can just deny the newer heliocentric view by the same method. Of course, this is silly. We should weigh the evidence for each theory and for each god. Another non sequitur on the board.
I think this is one of his worst ones. As far as his analysis of this, for one thing, it has nothing to do with science. The reason why is science actually is self-attesting and error-correcting. Whenever you have something in science, when we get better data, we will correct it. It doesn't mean that you can inductively and rationally say, hey, look, we were wrong before, therefore we're more likely wrong now. No, because we keep getting better and better. We're still wrong about certain things, but the things that we know we're correct about now are pretty solidified. I mean, will anybody say, well, we might be wrong about the shape of the earth? Well, no, flat earthers are wrong. And so I don't think it has anything to do with science. And as far as like the argument of the Abrahamic God, even if other gods are, because, they don't exist, is that evidence that God, the Abrahamic God doesn't exist? Not strong evidence. But these are inductive arguments, right? This is why you should never word it as proof, because it's not a proof. It's not a deductive proof. He's arguing inductively. And there's something to be said, again, I think the guy that wrote these 10 things was not articulate in writing arguments, because they're really not worded very well. If you wanted to write some kind of inductive argument, it would be along the lines of, look, you have 10,000 gods. Let's say we did disprove 9,999. You can then inductively say that all gods don't exist by induction. Why? And by the way, that would be very hard to do. You would have to actually, like I said, show those gods don't exist, which you can't, because you're begging the question at that point. You're just saying, hey, God, these gods don't exist, therefore your God doesn't exist. Well, you're begging the question at that point. You're just assuming that those gods doesn't exist. So induction, though, if greater than 50% and less than 100%, you can make what's called a cogent argument. If I say there's 100 marbles or 100 gumballs, I use gumballs analogy. If there's 100 gumballs in the gumball machine, and I know that X if I say more than half of them are blue, X is a gumball in the jar or the machine. X is blue. That is a cogent inductive argument. You can say, well, that doesn't prove that it's blue. Well, yeah, but it's not a deductive argument. It's an inductive. If it says more, that means more than 50%. If it's more but not all, and that's kind of a key thing. It has to be more than 50%, more than half, but less than all of them. Then you can make an inductive argument. And by the way, can you guys figure out why it has to be less than 100? Why is it that an inductive argument has to be greater than 50 for cogency, but it has to be also less than 100%? See if you can figure that out in the live chat there. Hey, Lawrence, how are you? Campbell says there's a paper that talks about our understanding of infinity as a linear line, but also infinity, degrees of infinity from the point 0 point infinity. Yeah, well, again, the continuum, the cardinality of the continuum, as they say, is the lowest of the cardinal orders. So, was it? No, yeah, isn't it? Because the natural numbers is. But the natural number doesn't map to the real numbers, do they? No, they don't map. So I think I made a mistake. I think the natural numbers are alpha null, and then the real numbers are alpha 1. Is that right? There's going to be a mathematician that listens to this, and they're going to be cringing right now, because I'm too lazy to go Google this. I'm not Googling anything right now. I literally am doing this off the top of my head. But will you guys look that up for me? Is alpha null the natural numbers, and alpha 1, I think, is the cardinal order of the reals, if I'm not mistaken. Somebody look that up. Appreciate it. But you guys agree that this isn't. I mean, I don't even want to say it's a non sequitur, because it doesn't. Well, it is, because it doesn't prove it, right? The way the guy worded it, sure, non sequitur, because he says it proves. So it doesn't prove that. But he could have said, look, there's all these other gods out there that have been worshipped by many, many different types of tribes. You don't believe in any of those exist. You even argue that they don't exist. So, the likelihood of your God being true by induction is low. And that's called low priors, or low probabilities based on Bayesian. And so I think that's a weak argument, because I think a lot of these are weak arguments. I don't think there's very many strong arguments, but it's still an argument. It's still something that you can't just say, oh, it's just a bad argument. It's an inductive argument, phrase, right? Yeah, I'm too lazy. My audience is too lazy to. Yeah, not in my job description. You all fail, man. I'm gonna look it up, because I swear to God, I'm just too lazy.
Number
right now.
5.
Look.
God either allows the devil to exist and is an accomplice, or it isn't an all-powerful God. An all-powerful and all-loving God wouldn't allow the devil to exist. Isaiah 45:7, KJV. Doyle sets up a false dilemma. It's not an either-or. There's another option. God is all-powerful and all-loving, and God allows the devil to exist because he has good reason to do so, which is why philosophically trained atheists have largely abandoned this proof. Fallacy, false dilemma.
Well, that's not necessarily true. Is it a false dilemma? And okay, I don't really think that it is, because this is the way I'm going to describe this. And again, you're probably going to get me pushed back, and Red Pen Logic is probably going to, if he's never going to watch this, but he probably could push back on it. But here's the reason why I don't think it's a false dilemma. A false dilemma is when you're giving two choices that you are arguing are necessary choices. Okay, then when they're not. If I say to you, do you want chicken or fish for dinner? I'm not saying those are the only two metaphysical choices. I don't know if the argument that Brian is given is offering, hey, look, why is God allowing Satan to live? You know, if he doesn't allow Satan to live, because he's an omnibenevolent being, then he's not God, and God shouldn't exist. I don't think he's arguing those are the only metaphysical things. I think he's arguing it as, hey, do you want chicken or fish? You know, not chicken then fish. But that's not a logical false dichotomy. A false dichotomy would be, it's either the case that God exists, or a true dichotomy would God exist or God does not exist. But if I say, look, I'm giving you an or, I'm giving you a disjunction, where I just think that by weighing the disjuncts, if God is omnibenevolent, he's all good, then why is there evil? If there's evil, then he can't be all good, right? That's the logical problem, evil kind of thing, right? And so that has not been abandoned, by the way. Plantinga has some arguments that does kind of minimize logical problem evil somewhat, but it's still a very good argument toward a very specific type of God, the omni type of God, the Anselm type God. But it's so narrow in scope that they generally don't use it to the Christian God as posited by modern Christianity. So if that's what he means by it, then I agree with him. I think the evidential problem of evil is much better. It's wider in scope, but it really is, hey, if there's a benevolent being, why is there suffering? Why is there animal cruelty? Why is there, the suffering even in the animal kingdom? Why is there hurricanes? Why did I stub my toe? And they also, and he will argue, where God has a greater good. This is almost like Hicks' soul building theodicy. Well, the reason why there's evil, because God wants you to learn from it. You know, it builds your soul. So what? We learn something, in a matter of how many times, years we're on Earth, that for eternity it's going to really matter. If we're spending an eternity in the afterlife, what the hell is 50, 60, 70, 80 years, or people even die young? What do they learn? That doesn't make any sense to me. That's some kind of learning thing, But she can argue, oh, it's because of God's plan. God wanted this way, but that doesn't explain anything. And it seems like most of the evil in the world doesn't even come from Satan. I mean, I don't think Satan is in there going, hey, we're going to have earthquakes. Hey, I'm going to, send this tornado to this guy's house. Oh, I'm going to make, Steve stub his toe. I don't think Satan is wasting his time doing that. Ian says, is it incorrect to say abductive reasoning to say the gumball is blue? It is incorrect. It's not abductive. It would be inductive. Abducting is the best explanation. Right? I think abducting is a form of induction, but an abductive argument would be, let's say I'm upstairs and I smell smoke, and I say, hey, I smell smoke and I feel heat. There's a fire downstairs. What's the most likely cause of the phenomenon that I'm having? Well, I have a past experience that fire is warm. I have past experience that smoke, it comes with fire, and I know what smoke smells like. So, that's an abductive argument, that what's the most likely cause of that, But it could be something completely different. It could be my neighbor's cooking next door. It could be somebody turned up the temperature, right? Because the abductive argument doesn't necessarily have to follow on a conclusion. It's inductive. But it's the most reasonable explanation given the information. So being blue is not an abductive argument. Being blue is inductive. That is more likely the case because it's greater than 50 but less than 100. April's got pretty much, yeah. April says, if the number of gumballs are blue, then he wouldn't be guessing. But it's not a guess. It's not a guess. It's still an inductive argument. The reason being is if it's 100%, then it becomes a deductive argument, right? If you say 100% of marbles are blue, X is a marble, X is blue, that's a deductive argument that follows from the premises that must be true, right? Because all of them are blue. So it's no longer an inductive argument. Yeah. An inductive argument obviously can be wrong. Yeah. It's just, like I said, the best explanation. But like I said, I'm not going to say this is a real false dichotomy, because I don't think that's he's presenting it as two metaphysical necessities. I just think he's using it as, just a regular disjunction. Like, if this is the case, then that's the case. Like, again, if I say you want fish or chicken, now it would be a fallacy if you use a disjunct incorrectly. This is what's called a oh my goodness. By the way, I just got this video the other day, and so I was like, oh, when am I going to do it? So I haven't really time to prep, but I think there's something called affirming the disjunct. And affirming the disjunct, if I remember, is something along the lines of either A or B, not A. No, it should be. It is either A or B, A, therefore not B. That's affirming the disjunct fallacy. And you're like, well, why is that fallacious? Now think about that. A or B, A, therefore not B. And you're like, well, wait a minute. Yeah, you chose A, therefore it's not B. But the problem with that is the fallacy comes in is if you look at the truth tables for inclusive or, it could be both are true. So just because you've eliminated one of the disjuncts for an injunctive, inclusive disjunction, both A and B can be true, right? When we do it grammatically, though, it's not usually inclusive. I say chicken or fish, I'm actually doing exclusive or, right? You get one or the other, chicken or fish. Both can't be what you get. But on it's a general inclusive or for A or B. If A is true, then A or B is true. If B is true, then A or B is true. Or both are true. If both A and B are true, then you can say that A or B is true. If both are false, however, then it's not the case. But that's what's I think it was called affirming the disjunct. That would be a problem. But I don't think this guy is doing that, and I probably wouldn't call it a false dichotomy. Now, as far as the argument itself, again, going back to logical problem evil, he doesn't even address any of that stuff. And that goes in the fallacy. He's just saying it's a bad argument because it's a false dichotomy, even if it was. That doesn't mean that is the conclusion isn't something worth discussing, or that doesn't mean it's not true. And by the way, you don't need to use Ivan says likely, but you don't need to use the word likely. You don't need to throw that in for an inductive argument. You can actually say X is blue if it's more than 50%. It's still a cogent argument. And I know somebody's going to say, well, what about the black swan fallacy? I'm not even going to go there because, one, black swan is not a fallacy. Two, go read about it because it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, because that has to do with an induction that surprises you. It doesn't mean that it can't happen. And a lot of people get that confused. Black swan fallacy does not mean, oh, something has happened that, the induction didn't say. It just means it's so out of the ordinary. Like if I'm driving down a street and I see a White House, and I see 1,000 White Houses, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what's the next house? So it's going to be white. Oh no, it's a blue house. Yeah, that's a black swan fallacy. But it doesn't mean that you weren't correct in making a solid inductive argument based upon the fact that based upon prior observations, you're justified to believe something. But you know what? That belief could be wrong. You're not justified to say well, I know the next one's good. The next house I pass is going to be white. No, you ain't justified to say that. But believe, yeah, okay.
This surprisingly popular pro-choice. This is going to. Let's see what he's got. Follow. 3. There was no gods that have been proclaimed to logic since the old theory. And another 9, KJV. Doyle sets up a false loving. This proves that this and in this proof. Fallacy, false dilemma. Proof number 6. The God of the Bible is jealous of other gods. This proves that this God is not the only God. With multiple choices, only shows that there is no reason to choose just one. If a God were true, there would be no other options. Exodus 34:14. As a teacher who has given thousands of multiple choice tests over the years, I can say with some authority that multiple choices does not mean that there's no reason to choose just one. There are false answers, just like there are false gods. Another non sequitur.
Yeah, I didn't understand this one. I don't see how it's a non sequitur, and I don't see why he's really not even addressing what he's trying to say. The Bible does say there's other gods. This goes, what's called henotheism. And henotheism is the belief that there are other gods, but only one is worshipped, and that the Old Testament. And again, I'm not a biblical person. I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not a theologian. Take anything I say. When I say the word Bible, you might as well just turn off the video because I don't know fuck all about the Bible. I never claimed to. it's just not my shtick. I've read it. I know what's in it kind of basically. I don't know scripture and verse. I know John 3:16, and that's about it. But I am definitely somebody who would never, ever say that I know fuck all about the Bible. But the basics that I do know, the Bible does mention other gods. As a matter of fact, even in Genesis, it talks about, a council of gods, let us make man in our image and things of that nature. You should have no other gods before me, but this is all, basic stuff that anybody knows. So it's not, you don't need a biblical scholar to know that. But he does talk about other gods. Now, some people argue those mean idols. Some people have argued, I've heard people say, well, he's not talking about actual ontological beings. He's not talking about a council of gods. That seems to be the case in Genesis. He's talking about false gods, gods that don't exist. But then the retort to that is, why would God be jealous of gods that don't exist? And by the way, Lawrence is in the live chat. He's a Bible dude. He can tell you right now that I just don't give a shit about the Bible. But Lawrence knows about the Bible. He's an atheist, and he, for some strange reason, loves the Bible, not judging. But he would be the person to go on that. And so he can criticize that all he wants about me. But let me ask you, Lawrence, does not the Bible say that God is a jealous God to other gods, that other gods do exist, as far as let us make man in our image, that you should have no other God before me? And again, not to get into the exegesis of it and, hermeneutical crap, but basically somebody could argue that, hey, look, God is recognizing there are other gods out there, and he's a jealous God. Because why would he be jealous of false gods? That's what the guy's making the point of arguing. Does that mean that particular God doesn't exist? No. But it lends credence to this vision of an omnibenevolent, omnipresent, omniscient God that just loves everybody, doesn't have some personality quirks. Jealousy is, and it's funny because there's a difference between jealousy and envy, right? Envy is coveting what somebody has. Jealousy is afraid that somebody's going to take something from you, right? You're out with this, beautiful lady, and you're like, hey, you're worried that, somebody's going to hit on your girl. That's jealousy. Envy would be like, hey, you see somebody out with some hot girl, and you're like, yeah, man, that guy's lucky. Or guy or whatever, equal. You see him girl with some guy, and you're like, yeah, that girl's so lucky. He's so fine. That's envy, coveting what they want. And I just think that an all-powerful being would be beyond those types of things. And again, I think that the Christian God in this classical theist approach is very anthropomorphized. I think a lot of attributes about God have come from people, because we know people have these types of beliefs and feelings and emotions. And I think they were just transferred into some kind of being that has been anthropomorphized to death, so to speak. That's just my personal view. But anyways, Lawrence, is that am I on track? By the way, criticize me all you want, Lawrence, because you look, when it comes to the Bible, you know I don't know anything about it.
Proof number 7. There is no evidence that spiritual energy exists, so we can conclude that psychics, ghosts, and gods are non-existent. Otherwise, God has nothing to be made of. Not this again. An immaterial being, by definition, is not made of material. I'm not going too quickly here, am I? God is not made of anything. God is spirit. God is spirit, but he's not made of spiritual energy. He's immaterial. So this is a straw man. But Doyle might also be begging the question by assuming materialism, that matter and energy are all that exist. Proof number 8.
See, I think red pill logic is way off on this one, way off the mark. Because what Brian Doyle was the fallacy that he should have said, let me go back and see if I can pull it up.
I'm not going to conclude that psychics...
Okay. The fallacy that he should have called him out for, because Doyle does create a fallacy here, is called argument ad ignorantium. Argument from ignorance, basically. Argumentium ad ignorantium. It basically is that because there's no evidence of something, or something has not been proven false, we conclude the negation. That is a fallacy. That is the argumentum ad ignorantium fallacy. You don't have to say it's false. You can, or there's like, you don't have to say, hey, look, it hasn't been proven, therefore it's false, to create that fallacy. You can say, look, there's no evidence to support this, therefore I'm going to conclude it's false. That is still an argument from ignorance. And that's exactly what Doyle does here. There's no evidence that spiritual evidence exists, therefore we conclude that psychics, ghosts, and gods are non-existent. That is an argument from ignorance. There are different ways of wording this differently, right? I mean, first of all, when we're talking about evidence, the word evidence in philosophy is not quite the same as it is in science, and a lot of people equivocate that. Okay, scientific evidence and evidence in philosophy are not quite the same thing, because you can have a rational, logical argument that's inductive or something like that in philosophy. That's evidence, but that's because it's rationalism. In science, they go by empiricism. It's data driven. Your argument could be, doesn't matter. If you don't have the science, the data, the observation, the experimental results to back it up, then you have no evidence for it. Big difference between science and philosophy. And I think a lot of people equivocate that word evidence. When they say there's no evidence for God, that's false. There are multiple evidences for God through attestations of testimonies and, rational arguments. Doesn't mean they're good arguments or strong arguments. They could be weak arguments. But that's still considered to be evidence. But as Oppie puts it, it's weak evidence. Draper, Oppie, Mackey, none of them will sit there and go, oh, there's no evidence for God. And these are atheists. I mean, they're really heavy atheists. Or, Mackey's dead, but he was a heavy atheist. Because they're talking about philosophically speaking. Now, if somebody says there's no scientific evidence for God, that is true. That is absolutely true. But there's also no scientific evidence that God does not exist. The reason being is because science doesn't address the God claim. Science has non-overlapping magisteria. Science has methodological naturalism. So there is no evidence one way or another scientifically. But that's a key word to use when you're talking about evidence, if you're talking about evidence. Okay? Big difference. So you shouldn't be even saying there's like no scientific evidence for God, because that's, okay, sure, that's true. But who cares? There's no scientific evidence against God either. It just cancels each other out. So this is a false conclusion. I believe psychics are bullshit. Okay? Ghosts, I think, I don't think, I don't believe in ghosts, but, and I certainly don't think that if ghosts exist, they're dead people. I have had weird experiences. I really have, but I cannot say that they're any way where they're dead people. So, I don't believe ghosts exist, but I think that psychics, at least every single psychic that has ever been promoted on TV or, in the news articles or any of them, all of them, I believe, all of them, I am convinced, are frauds. They're absolute con men. That's just not me going, oh, I lack a belief. No, I will say it right here, very clear for the people in the back. The people that claim to be psychics that are making money by fleecing people are con men. They're false psychics. They're liars. All of them. All of them. And people are like, well, Steve, you're making a category claim. Can you give evidence for that? Yeah, I give evidence in philosophical sense by giving rational argumentation. By the same thing that all the psychics we've seen are frauds. I'm making an inductive argument based upon high priors on a statistical Bayesian analysis that if you have had all these people that claim to have mediumship, all these people that claim to be able to read minds and do, readings of people, every single one of them we've seen has been, without question, demonstrated to be false when it's tested. Right? And so they say, well, you can't logically deduce that all of them are frauds that way. No, but I can make a strong inductive argument. See the difference between how I present it and Doyle presents it? Huge difference, because all I'm doing is I'm justifying the belief. I justify my belief that all psychics are bullshit because all the ones that have ever been tested under controlled conditions where they say they can do something have failed. All of them. They put themselves up for review. It wasn't that science can address these claims. What it is they're giving claims that they claim science can address, and they've been wrong about that. Which inductively, to me, definitely implies that they're full of shit. And plus, we also know how the tricks are done. We also know how cold reading's done and hot reading's done. I've done it. Matter of fact, I watched this thing the other day where this guy was doing cold reading, and he was saying that during these cold reads, people would actually say, dude, man, you claim that this is a trick, but you've got the gift, man. You're just denying it. You're using this gift, but then you have denying it by telling people that it's just cold reading, but it's not. You've got the gift. And I told the guy, I wrote it in his video, I was like, dude, I've been there, done that. I've literally had more people that I can count tell me, hey, Steve, because I was doing chiromancy, reading palms, way back in the day, like 30 years ago, whatever it was. And let me make this very clear. I never deceived anybody. I never used it to say I have a power that you don't have. I was explaining to people how people would cold read. This was back in my early 20s or whatever it was. And because I was always into science, obviously. But in my youth, I was interested in palm reading for some reason. And yes, when I was a wee teen, I believed it. But then I learned it's all bullshit, right? So it explained to people how people did these cold reading techniques and hot reading techniques and reading body language and eliciting responses and going where the response goes. And yet people are telling me, hey, Steve, you say it's bullshit, but you were too accurate just to be, cold reading. Well, no, it's what a cold read. If you're good at it, you can get some really good stuff. And by the way, not everybody. There might be like one person that I completely fucked it up, right? But the next person, man, I got some lucky hits. And they're like, holy shit, Steve, you really can read minds or whatever, tell me about things that nobody else could kind of know. It's all bullshit, And so I think you can make a strong inductive argument. But I think where Red Pill Logic messed up is he didn't call this out from an argument to ignorance, right? And as far as like what God's comprised of, I'll leave that up to theologians. If they argued God's divinely simple, meaning that he's not comprised of any moving parts or any atoms or anything like that, he's spirit, whatever. I don't know what the hell that means. I really don't. And so I'll leave that up to the theologians, okay?
Ghosts and gods are non-existent.
Oh, by the way, do you guys agree with me on the whole cold reading thing? Let me know on that too.
Otherwise, God has nothing to be made of. Not this again. An immaterial. So this is a straw man. But Doyle might also be begging the question by assuming materialism.
And it's not begging the question either. Begging the question is when you assume a premise and then you derive the conclusion from a single premise. I don't think that's what he's doing either. When he's talking about them saying that God is spiritual and divinely simple, he's still saying there's an essence there. He's still saying there's a there, whether it be, like the mind, the consciousness of the mind, whether that has some kind of substance, whether you have a substance dualist or it's just one emergent property, there's still something there to be discussed. It's abstract. It's like saying, what is two? What's the smell of two? Well, who the hell knows? Because two is not a concrete object. But we talk about two as it exists. Does the number two exist ontologically? No. But is there some kind of mathematical Platonist realm of things where two exists in an abstract way? Yes. If you subscribe to like Quine's indispensability thesis, and you're a mathematical Platonist, which most mathematicians are, they'll say yes, numbers exist. They don't mean that sit there you can put a number two on your table, though. That's not what they mean by that. Again, these are philosophical terms, And so they're talking about completely different what you think of existence to taking up space-time, right? But when we're talking about God and God existing, okay, but he's not comprised of anything. Okay, he doesn't have any single parts, but if he's spirit, what is that spirit? What is that substance?
That matter and energy are all that exist. Proof number 8. There is no such thing as nothing. For nothing to exist...
Huh? Nothing to exist?
...would cause it to be something. Creationists believe that God created the universe out of literal nothing. This is an equivocation of the word nothing. By nothing, we mean no thing. That is, God didn't make the universe out of anything. We certainly do not believe that God created the universe out of something that's called nothing. So there's no thing here that disproves God.
Yeah, I don't think this is an equivocation fallacy. I think a Red Pill Logic messed up on this one too. He didn't recognize this fallacy for what it was. This is called a ridification fallacy is what it is. And a ridification fallacy is a hypostantiation fallacy where you try to make something concrete by an abstraction. It's a rare fallacy, I gotta admit. But the fallacy of ridification is when you say talking about nothing. Well, if you talk about nothing, then it's something. No, you're making a concreteness out of an abstraction. And if nothing exists, we're talking, of course, about philosophical nothing, not scientific nothing, because that would be equivocation. But when we're talking about God creating something out of nothing, that's ex nihilo rather than ex materia. Some people argue in the Christian community that God created the universe out of existing substance. And out of that substance, ex materia, created the universe. Other people do claim that it was created out of nothing, ex nihilo, which has no matter, no space, no time. It was created by the will of God. Poof, there's the universe. However that works. Again, I'm not a theologian, so I'm not even going to get into that stuff. But it is out of nothing. It's It's I want to create a universe somewhere, wherever, because I don't know where it would be with respect to God, because it's outside, space time, which is a hard concept to really get around if you're not even talking about multiverses, because I don't even know where outside a light cone would be, because everything that's in the universe has to fall within the light cone of a Minkowski diagram, right? It has to be in the future cone, the past cone, or the present. Everything that ever existed, even the past, the future, they all have to exist on that null, what's called a null geodesic line, which is that 45-degree angle that extends from the origin. Everything that ever existed has to be in that cone, the future or past light cone. And so if you go just, outside of that cone, it seems nonsensical. But I don't think that's what the Christians are arguing, that God exists outside that cone. They're like arguing God is everything, including outside of the cone. That's not where he exists. He's just everywhere, even outside the light cone, which I don't know what the hell that would even mean again. But it's still nothing. When they're talking about nothing, they're still saying God created something out of nothing. So I don't think this is equivocation. I think it's a bad argument from Doyle, yes. But it's, like I said, it's a reification fallacy. And it doesn't disprove God. If God's all powerful and he exists somewhere and he creates some kind of spatio-temporal isolated bubble dealing with these infinities that we can't wrap our heads around, okay. But, again, if you have this type of being and he creates a being with such limited brain capacity, because let's be realistic here. Even the brightest genius is still an idiot compared to God if God's all-knowing, right? I mean, he created a being that has such limited cranial capacity that we just physically cannot restore all the information to be required to know everything. We're not even remotely close. I mean, we have a lot of information. The brain is a huge amount of information. I don't even know how many, petabytes and quadribytes and whatever the hell it is. It's a lot. But it still would be insignificant of all the things possibly to know. And this, again, I'm not using the argument like Hovind goes, well, we only know like 1% of everything. No, that's a bad quantitative analysis. Okay. Kibamaki don't disagree. Okay. I was like, oh, yeah, I disagree with it. Okay. But, all right. So you think that is a reification fallacy? Because I think it is. Because he's arguing once you start talking about nothing, you have something. And that's just not how it works. That's just creating a concrete object out of abstraction.
See what I did there? Proof number 9.
It is a limitation of grammar, yeah.
9. This isn't a finely tuned world created with us in mind. The sun gives you cancer, most of the water is undrinkable, and diseases run rampant. If there was an intelligent designer, there wouldn't be any mistakes. First, just because you can't drink the ocean or antifreeze doesn't mean they're not designed. They're just designed for another purpose. Second, something doesn't have to be perfectly designed in order to be intelligently designed. Third, imperfect design is perfectly consistent with intelligent design in a broken world. Number 9.
Well, yes and no. I'm going to give him a little bit of credit on this one. That, yeah, obviously antifreeze doesn't have to be designed for you to drink it, right? It could be used for, designed to be coolant. Okay, I get that. The problem is that the biological design seems to have flown through evolutionary processes. Now, I don't know if Red Pill Logic is a younger creationist or not. I don't know if he denies evolution or not. I have no idea. I don't think Mike Winger is a younger creationist. I for some reason, I seriously don't think that he is. So I don't know what his stance on evolution is per se. I think he mentions it here once coming up, but the fact is that the way biology is, we're designed. It is based upon some bad engineering principles. Okay, and I would imagine that an all-powerful God wouldn't have bad engineering principles. And you can argue, well, he wanted something badly designed. Okay. I can get that, but at least word it in a way that makes sense. I'm gonna help out the intelligent design argument out there. Okay, if you want to argue intelligent design, the best way to actually argue that would be something along the lines of something like what's used to be they still have it called designed obsolescence. Designed obsolescence is something that actually does exist in things like electronics and things of that nature, where it's designed to fail at a certain time. Why? So you go out and buy another one. It's design obsolescence. They're not designed to, let's say something designed, you get like 5,000 uses out of a battery right before it dies out, a rechargeable battery or something like that, right? Could they make it be more? Could they design it better where they can get 10,000 out of it? Yeah, probably. But they don't do that because then you don't buy another battery, right? If they wanted to add more strength, tensile strength to things and more reinforcement to things last longer, it would cost more. It'd be more expensive. That's true. But it could be designed that way. But they could actually design it, and people have actually designed things who actually fail at a certain amount of time, right? So it was intelligently designed to fail. That was the intent. That was the goal of it, was to say, okay, we want this to fail at a certain amount of time by design obsolescence, that you have to go out and get another one. And that's a lot of Chinese products too. So if you argue that God's doing that, okay, there's other. I think there's defeaters of that particular argument. Like, what's the point of that though? I mean, why does God want a fallen world? I mean, He supposedly created us perfect initially. Didn't God create man in His image and create us perfect? And again, I don't know what the perfect genome would be, because Sanford argues that we have genetic entropy, which makes no sense to me. I have a Dr. Hancock talking about that soon, hopefully. And I was like, hey, can you really explain genetic entropy to like a second grader? Because I just don't understand his argument. I think that I do, but at the same token, I think genetic entropy is so stupid. I just can't believe that he's actually making that argument. But Dr. Hancock was basically like, yeah, he's like, it is what you think it is. It's like it's that stupid. There's no real complexity to genetic entropy. It's just a really dumb argument based upon like a perfect genome. Then you introduce entropic forces, and so you have this decay of it, and it's bizarre. But if God designed us at perfect at one time, then what the hell changed just because we left the Garden of Eden? We're not the same design. I don't know. It's just weird. I just don't get it. But that's the way I would approach this particular argument. Okay.
Offers another non sequitur. Proof number 10. Evolution is obviously proven and true. This means that we weren't created by magic and are somehow superior to the animal kingdom. No creator, no God. Biological evolution, even if true, has nothing to do with the existence of God.
And that's true. And by the way, he says even if true. That's why I think I would like to think he's just using it as a rhetoric speech, which by the way wouldn't be bad. Even if true, it doesn't prove God. That's true. Yeah, even if evolution is true, it doesn't prove God. But I also don't know how he means it. Of like, well, evolution's not true, but even if it was, it wouldn't prove God. I don't know. I don't know red pill logic. I've never talked to the guy. I've seen his videos. I tagged him the other day on one of my videos because I was going to talk about this on the Non Sequitur show a little bit, to at least let people know I was going to do it, and I didn't get a chance to. That show ran 3 hours long, so he's probably wondering, why the hell did this guy tag me? And that was the reason why I tagged red pill logic on the Non Sequitur show, my last video. I was going to mention this, that I was going to do this review, but he is right though. Obviously, if evolution is true, it doesn't prove God. But I'll tell you more in a second on it.
It has to do with God's alleged role in biology. That's all. If Darwin was right, atheists can still be wrong, as shown by a large number of theistic evolutionists. So this is another non sequitur. Despite what you've been told, evolution doesn't disprove God.
Yeah, and I agree with him on this, by the way. The main issue I have, which again, red pill logic didn't point out on this particular argument, is that number 10 says evolution is obviously proven and true. That is a false statement. Evolution is true. The scientific theory is confirmed, but it's not proven. Stop saying scientific theories are proven. I know Aaron Ra put out a video talking about scientific theories being proven, and he even, I will tell you this straight up, he asked me to review that video before he put it out. He literally did. I'm not even joking. Aaron, he used to care about my philosophy, and he used to care about what I had to say. And he put out a video talking about saying things like the evolution is proven, stuff like that. And I gave him my feedback on it. And my feedback was, I understand how you're using the term. You're using the term very colloquially, because that's what he does, to mean that it's confirmed. But I think it's a very poor usage of the term, because science doesn't prove anything. And we mean that logically, right? We mean that deductively. Science does not prove anything. It demonstrates, it can have a conclusion, but we do not want something that is actually proven in the philosophical sense. And Aaron's talking from a scientific sense, and he's using these words very loosely because that's what Aaron does. And I said, I understand what you mean. I just don't like it, but whatever. And I didn't get much flack about it. I'm like, okay, whatever, go with it. But it rubs me the wrong way, because somebody who actually likes science, I would never go around saying science proved anything, because that just gives theists ammo, because a scientific theory can never be confirmed, or it should be proven. It can be only confirmed, and there's a big difference. The reason being is in logic, and I just talked about this on the Facebook page the other day, and a lot of people were not understanding this particular argument that I said. I was trying to explain this. Once something is proven, it is forever proven. Now, let me repeat that. Once something is proven, it is forever proven. It cannot be disproved. This is why when somebody says, well, I can't disprove your God exists until you prove that he does, that is a nonsensical statement. Because if theists could prove their God exists, the game over. They win. There's nothing you could do at that point. You cannot disprove something that has been proven. Same with atheists. If you can prove there are no gods, you win. Theists can't come along later and disprove that. Because once something is proven, it is forever proven. Now, somebody will go, well, what happens if there's a fault in the proof? Then it was never proven to begin with. It goes to the principle of attribution and retraction. You attribute the proof, but then you have to retract it as it was never proven. And I ran this argument. I said, if theists, I ran it two ways. I said, if theists prove God exists, then God must exist, which seems to make sense. All right, now I should be back. Is that better? Can you guys hear me now? My OBS for some reason crashes. I've installed. I'm going to be switching to vMix. I've been working on that, so maybe I can get that switched over the next week or so. I just have to test the vCall. I haven't really played with it that much, but yeah. So anyway, so I was just saying that. Does anybody understand why that's the case? That if once something's proven, you can't disprove it. That if I know God exists, then God must exist. If a theist knows God exists, God must exist. If an atheist knows God does not exist, then God must not exist. These are by necessity. I hope everybody understands that, because I got so much flack on the Facebook groups for that. You know, like I said, because I said, you know, if a theist knows God exists, God must exist. And, you know, they thought there was just a brilliant counter argument going, well, I could just say that if atheist knows God does not exist and God does not exist. See how stupid you are, Steve? I'm like, but you're literally proving my point. You're literally demonstrating my point here. Yes, what you said is true. So, anyways, that's this video in a nutshell. I think it kind of just peters out after that. Let me see if I can. I lost my video here. One sec.
That we weren't created by us. So hey, he's going to do this in 3 minutes. Well, there you have it, folks.
Okay, there you have it.
This surprisingly...
So, Eddie, yeah,
this is going to be...
He's absolutely right. Like I said, though, evolution, even if it's true, doesn't disprove God. And so that's a really bad argument. But what he can argue is that this is what I want to... That's why I wanted to come back and leave you with this, because I want to end this in less than 90 minutes airtime. That Darwin, one of the greatest things Darwin gave to society was not what people think that he did. Yes, the On Origin of Species is an amazing book, and yes, Darwin's speciation and natural selection is amazing. But one of the more, I think, powerful things that Darwin did for society is he gave an alternate explanation for things that at one time only thought had a teleological explanation. He gave what's called a teleonomic explanation for the biodiversification. He said, hey, everybody thinks that all this, life and everything had to come from a God. But there's another explanation. That explanation is natural selection. Did he get a lot of things wrong? Absolutely. Did he know about genetics? No. I mean, DNA was just coming around at the time. And do we find out now that natural selection is all that? No, not really. Natural selection is Photo argues natural selection is a tautology. He's like, even argues that natural selection doesn't really do anything. And there's some argument for that. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And this is an argument like we get in a heated argument with Aaron Ra back in the day, because people would be like trying to explain Photo's argument. He's a philosopher. And Aaron would be just like, but we've witnessed natural selection. Natural selection exists. And everybody's trying to explain to him, Aaron, he's an evolutionist. He's a philosopher, but he absolutely accepts evolution. But he also argues from a philosophical standpoint about what can be selected for, that natural selection doesn't really do any of the heavy selection. It doesn't explain anything. And Aaron doesn't get that. But he's kind of right on that. Matter of fact, if you go watch Dr. Hancock's one of his videos, he explains that genetic drift and gene flow have a much more substantive influence in a population than just natural selection. And so that's how Darwin knew was Darwin's theory was was evolution by natural selection, and he had some postulates for that we don't actually hold true. But some of them, like offspring, about the number of offspring compared to the offspring that die and things of that nature. But the modern evolutionary synthesis is not Darwinian evolution. Darwinian evolution died out in the early 20th century, if not even the late 19th century. We have what's called the modern evolutionary synthesis combined with descent with modification, and that incorporates this stuff people call the third way. It incorporates things like evo devo. It incorporates things like epigenetics. Yes, biology is complicated, but Darwin gave us the ability to say, how do we explain the fact we see so many extant species? And we know now that these extant species come about from prior extant species, and they come back from prior populations that have evolved for 4 billion years. And it doesn't mean that a God didn't do it, but it means that we have an alternate explanation that doesn't require a God. That's the big thing. It's teleonomic versus teleologic. And that's the big takeaway that we have from evolutionary biology. It does not disprove a God, but it doesn't require the necessity of a God. And I think that's pretty powerful. I really do. So anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. This was my review of Red Pill. I'm sorry, Red Pen. Big difference. There's some Red Pill guys out there that are just some whack jobs. We won't get into the old Esme thing. He's a whack job. But no, this guy, Red Pen Logic, seems like a straightforward dude, straight shooter. I think that he got some things wrong. I think that he didn't really address the arguments and steelman them the best that he could. But, I will go after theist and atheist equally when it comes to this stuff. And I think that in this particular video, the atheist did not articulate his arguments very well. And I certainly don't at all think, in no way did they prove God doesn't exist. And so he needs to stop using that word. But I also think that Red Pill Logic, I don't think your analysis of it was that great. But you know what? You're going to probably say, if you ever watch this, you're going to say the same in my video, right? You're going to say, people watch this and go, yeah, Steve, your review, it sucked. Okay, I'll take the hit for that. If you think that, the fallacies that I called out were not the actual fallacies, I'll take the hit for that. Just explain why. I'm like, okay, I can see that argument. Go for it, but I still maintain that certain things are straw man arguments when you argue things that are not what the person's actually arguing, right? You should always try to steel man them. So, there's a lot of pills. The fun is when you take all of them, take all the pills, and then you really you could become one with the universe. So, anyways, like I said, I want to keep this easily digestible. I love hanging out with you guys late at night. I got messaged by a very dear friend of mine that loves my late night hangouts. I'm not going to mention who it was because it doesn't really matter. I don't know. Like I said, I don't know if they listen to this one or not, but they said, hey, Steve, I really love that you're doing hangouts after 10 o'clock at night Pacific time, because that's when they're home doing stuff and just kind of listening. And I'm like, even if it's that one person, and you know who you are, even if that one person does listen, it makes it all worthwhile, because I want somebody to have some takeaway from this, whether it be one person or 100 people or 1,000 people. I really want there to be a takeaway. So on that note, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you agree, disagree. Leave me a message on the teleonomic versus teleological. All that basically means is that teleological is basically telos is goal driven. Okay, it's some kind of purpose. So a teleological argument would be God had a purpose for something. The purpose was from some kind of telos. But a teleonomic means that it has the appearance of some kind of purpose or intelligent design, but doesn't mean that it was. You see some very complex patterns in nature. They're not teleological. They're teleonomic. They don't require some kind of masterful intelligence to make these kind of really complex patterns and chaos theory and fractal stuff and all this other stuff. That's the difference, right? The teleonomic doesn't require that. And Christopher, thanks for watching. I know I made your other mod on the other channel. You want this particular account modded? Because if you do, let me know. I know this is your alt account. But yeah, like I said, as always, please leave me comments. The more comments, the merrier. I got a lot of the non sequitur stuff. That's great. Now on this channel, if you guys could start doing the same, leave me comments of what you think. I really do appreciate it. Okay, I'll give you a mod here. One sec. I just made a Satanist mod. Eat it. Eat it, Christians. I'm just kidding. I'm equal opportunity, man. Christians, Satanists, atheists, Baptists, Buddhists, I don't care. As long as you try to come and have a civil conversation and you want to talk about what you believe, and we'll go by the facts, and everybody and all are welcome. Okay? So with that, good night.